Say hi before I take off.
Hey, you going? You going?
Well, I'm going to be here for just a little bit because I've got to be down at. It's okay. We cover some stuff. So yeah, because I got to be in Cassopolis by 4. So I'm only going to stay till about 1:30, and then I'm going to take off. So I don't have to buck traffic trying to get there. But we'll talk. We'll talk.
An African American from town in Germany.
So anyway, check your. I realized that I sent something out today, but I didn't. I forgot to send it to you. I'll send it. I updated the dialogue guide for the work.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's coming along real good.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, we just kind of.
Oh, right.
Nice to see you. A lot of furniture pieces down where they.
Yeah, I remember seeing.
Make some.
Yeah.
Been working on this work stuff. We're trying to. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. There'll probably be a couple people making their way in, but really, this is such a great time. We're gonna have so much fun today. We've been, starting actually with Dale and with Carla last summer. We started doing more things with experiential learning, and then I was fortunate enough to be able to have Bill join our team in the spring, so we could move even further. And we said, let's just start having some conversations and learn from each other around digital storytelling. So I'm really glad you guys are here because we're doing a lot of storytelling. We want to learn from you, share what we're doing, and then let's see what other things come out of our conversation. But let's just start with some introductions. Jeff, would you like to start? We'll just go around this way.
My name is Jeff Grable. I'm an department called Writing Rhetoric and American Cultures. And we're doing some experiments with experiential learning, and we're excited to learn all we can learn.
I'm Bob Halberger. He's the chair of my department. So, yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. I teach a lot of movie making and writing, so happy to be here. It's rather experiential the way we go over there. So.
Yeah, I'd like to say Jeff's one of our faculty fellows. He and Julie Lindquist working on writing online and at scale and other things related to writing pedagogy. So we've been doing some experiments like MOOCs the last year or so. And Bump's on our advisory board for MSU Mobile.
I'm Stuart Blythe. I'm a colleague of him. He's my chair. And I'm here primarily because I work also with scientists who want to figure out whether the models that they're making make sense to other people. So, see, there may be a connection.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Stuart.
I'm Shelby. I'm a recent creative advertising graduate in the Media Sandbox program over in ComArts. And I'm looking for that this summer. And I still have this video that we're going to see, so that will be fun. I'm excited to chat with you.
Thanks for coming, Shelby.
I'm Angie Ballin. I'm a master's student in CALE, which is higher adult and lifelong education. And this topic I find fascinating.
What's your research focus in Halia?
I'm sort of in between a couple of things. So this fits in with learning and curriculum change, which I have personal experience with.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Hi, I'm Nicole Springer. I am the Associate Director over at the Center for Service Science and Engagement. And I'm just really interested in this topic and how it can fit into the work that we do and how we do.
Thanks for coming.
My name is Christy Schichtel. I'm also with the Center for Service Science and Engagement.
Thanks.
My name is Tom Fritz, and I'm with the MSU Neighborhoods. I'm an engagement director over there, and we're thinking about using a framework like this with our academic coaching programs during the fall. So here we're going to figure out more.
So just for clarification, so there's what, 6 neighborhood engagement centers?
There are 5. Yeah.
There's 5.
Yeah.
So are you director of one of them or overall 5?
I'm over one of them. So I have North as a geographic focus, and then health and wellness as a holistic focus.
So the health model cuts across all. Okay, interesting. Cool.
I'm Stephen Thomas. I'm in zoology. I'm also at the Center for Integrated Studies in General Science. And I'm interested in this because I do a lot of research around visual communication science. And usually we focus on how to use narrative to connect disparate ideas in science.
And Stephen's also one of our newest faculty fellows, along with Melissa McDaniels and Julie Barkin. Use basically, hopefully, by the time you see him again in a year, he'll be master of an open educational resource repository of editable digital images around science and teaching. How's that for vision?
That's perfect, yeah.
I think we said that at our last meeting.
Carla Lovick, I'm a graduate assistant with MSU Global, working with some MSU Global projects as well as Spartans Without Borders, and I'm also a doctoral student in Hale. And yeah, Spartans Without Borders.
And I'm Chris Geith. This is my team, and I thank you for being here. And I'm still wearing this. It's been a year, and the string has not broken yet. So another year, maybe I can take it off or break the string on purpose. We'll see. This is my reminder to myself to balance all this technology-mediated instruction like MOOCs and online and hybrid and flipped and everything with an equal focus, or maybe even more, on experiential learning and seeing in what ways technology can be used to not replace it or automate it or mediate it, but strengthen it. So we started with the assessment side of experiential learning, and that's where the digital storytelling stuff comes in. So far so good. I want to thank you all for helping me do this.
Hi, I'm Renee Wallace, and I am with Food Plus Detroit, and we work in partnership with MSU Global. We just think we absolutely rock. I'm here because in the work that we do, our focus is on equipping and accelerating food-related projects, agriculture-related projects in Detroit, and clearly being able to articulate narratives in ways that tell the authentic aspects of the story and the work, and also become very powerful mediums for sharing knowledge, creating new and sharing, existing knowledge is really important. And in Detroit in particular, I think we're in a perfect storm as it relates to the work that we're doing. So I see this as a very powerful way of equipping the folks that are doing work. So we can tell our
story to have the
to the world.
And Kelly, let's make a little spot for you and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kelly Water. I am kind of being an engineer, so I'm just really much.
Thank you for being here. Maybe an aspiring MSU freshman, maybe in here. See if we can all help that. Rashad, you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll let Bill take it.
Sure.
And Julie, too.
Hi. I'm Rashad Muhammad. I am, what was my new title? Was Optimist Prime?
Cute, for sure.
Yeah. But essentially, my role is to help come up with technical solutions to the things that we do. Education.
Thank you, Pat. And Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Rose, and I'm Chief Global Event Planner, and I assist with Skype.
Thank you. All right, Bill, take it away. It's all yours.
Hi folks, I'm Bill Heinrich, and well, I'm a research specialist now at MSU Global, and I'm finishing my doctorate in higher education next May, so that's progressing. And I come to this project through a real active role in experiential learning, both as a product and a provider of experiential learning opportunities. So I have a really personal investment in this, but my none of this is original. This has all been, different parts of this have all been done before, and that's what I think is interesting, that we're combining a lot of different moving parts in a way, perhaps, and across different kinds of learning experiences that hasn't been done before. So that's what we're offering new or original in this particular vein. So you might have seen different, you might have seen different ways of thinking about this. We are really fortunate to have Shelby Robinson with us, who was a proprietor of this video, one of the makers, one of the originators. So the Media Sandbox folks team, the street team, or group of students, who wanted to do something cool and then did this. Do you want to talk more about that before we show the video?
Basically, a group of us got together and we realized that we all have similar skills that we learned in our education that we can take elsewhere to people, such as the Georgia Street Community Collective, different nonprofits that don't really have those opportunities. We found, as a lot of you probably know, with nonprofits, they don't necessarily have the money or the manpower to do some of the things that come like firsthand to us. So we were like, you know what, why don't we just take these skills and go into a place and kind of do a revamp challenge. And so that's kind of what you'll see in the video.
And when we looked at it from our lens as researchers and educational personnel, my first course of study is in high impact practices, which is what ASU categorizes as a series of different things like service learning, internships, undergraduate research, different applied projects. Intensive writing is part of that. So there's a whole array of things that of high impact educational practices that share characteristics that get students further, have them persist in higher ed undergrad specifically, and closer and faster to graduation. And those are important outcomes for all of us. So that's where I think these synergies go. So from there.
Well, back up just for a second.
Sure.
How did we link experiential learning and storytelling in the first place? Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah,
Maybe we're here yet.
Yeah, maybe I'll.
Well, we started realizing, everybody's doing some form of experiential learning. We do is that we don't have a lot of data to show all of the great things. We have anecdotal stories and probably assessments and portfolios and journals and things, but we know there's a lot of meat and juice in there that we're not capturing with any firm evidence. So we thought, what are some tools we could use to start showing everything that a learner is getting out of an experience, whether it's service learning or study abroad or a project. So we landed on, after talking to a bunch of people, including Stuart, remember he came and you talked to us last year, and Bump, and Jeff, and other folks, and Mark Sullivan. Mark just joined us from music. Mark's our creative fellow this summer, so he's helping us design all of our art exhibits for the coming year with an explicit link to innovation. I'll put a little plug for Mark's stuff. But anyway, we talked to a lot of folks and said, okay, so if students are able to tell really good, meaty, rich stories about their experience, in what ways can we does that help make those that are learning more visible? And if it does, in what ways can educators look at it and what would they see from it? Would they actually see more, and could we use this as an assessment tool? That was just kind of the rough idea. And the Sandbox team that Shelby was on was our first sort of experiment. So that's what we're going to, today's workshop is actually for you to experience what we experienced in our first experiment, and to kind of help us with further iteration, so that you can experience how we went through it and share observations and help us make it better next time.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. You're going to, as experiential educator, I can't do a workshop without having you guys do something. So we're going to watch the video, and while we're watching the video, you have Post-it notes. Those are your tools. So feel free to make as many observations. Ideally on the Post-it notes, just one per Post-it. Feel free to use them. And there's pens and many Post-it notes here. Colors are for variety more than organization at this point, so don't worry about that.
And how long is the video?
The video is about 5 minutes, maybe 5.5, 6 minutes. So in that, I'd like you to look for all the different things you would identify as an instance of learning, or something, or an outcome, or a demonstrated competency. We call it by many names, but it sort of means, it can mean similar things. So look for what you see as educational gains. These are all MSU students at the time. Shelby's not graduating. But we're interested in what you see. Because we carry multiple perspectives and lenses on learning, we should see different things based on our own training and background. And we're interested in just hearing that, trying it out, filling out the process of learning from each other along a common source of information.
And then tell them what we're going to do with that.
And then after that, we are going to put those learning outcomes or topics in a framework and try to make some sense of that in terms of what could be with projects like this. We'll get to the content of that in a minute. I don't want to give it all away. That's the mark of experiential learning. You got to do something first.
Let's see.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so feel free to move your chair so you can see the video, and then we'll move again. They're all wheelie chairs. It's really fun. If you'd like a push, I'm happy to. Yeah, that's right.
We are the Media Sandbox. We are the Media Sandbox Street Team, an elite creative squad from Michigan State University.
We are a creative collaboration of designers, copywriters, videographers, and social media and PR strategists.
And we want to take these skills and things we've learned to nonprofits across the country. We're getting out of the sandbox and into the real world by helping nonprofits with our creative services. We ultimately want to show that creativity connects us all.
Sunday we're going to the Georgia Street Community Collective.
I think it's a great opportunity for us to flex our creative brain power and do some really cool things. Well, right now I'm kind of overwhelmed thinking about the amount of stuff we have to do, but I mean, it's so exciting as a student, as someone who's wanted to do this, as someone who's super passionate about it. It's like a dream come true.
Personally, I grew up just outside of Detroit in a suburb called Grosse Pointe. Obviously, it's nothing like the area we went to.
On Google Street View, it looked interesting. It just kind of looks like an empty building, really.
We didn't realize how in over our head we were when we saw the neighborhood. And to see Mark walk out of that building with the biggest smile on his face, everybody immediately felt better.
I wanted to clean up some vacant lots and had to decide what to do with them. I decided to put a small garden and make it look like a park or a gathering place for the neighborhood. We have an orchard, a community garden, 38 raised beds, our community center, just made up of a house and a whole corner store. Corner store is in a community building with a kitchen. The house has our library and a computer lab. And we also have a park, which is right next door with our early farm for animals.
I think we all have this idea of it being, just really fun and hanging out and doing a good deed, but the trip there and back was, I think, a little more exhausting than I thought it would be.
Right now, I'm just trying to set up some stuff for like the brochure and for creating a new logo. Just trying to sketch out our original ideas and try to make a plan of like what we're going to be doing.
Alex and I are working on designing some seed packets or labels for seed packets.
The ideology would be
Some real marketing where we
grow in Detroit.
get the word out with seeds.
To be able to help a nonprofit organization like the GSCC and help Mark, who has devoted his entire life to the organization. He doesn't work anymore. That's his full-time job. He helps his community. He feeds them and he supports them. He gives them computers to do homework and to apply for jobs. It's really just it's inspiring.
In a perfect world, it'll be open all day long, 24 hours a day. People can come in and out if they wanted to, but yes, Detroit.
You hear about it constantly in the media. All Detroit is, Detroit that, it's awful, it's the worst place to live. So to go there and to do something positive is really great.
I'm working actually on the sponsorship packet right now, so not necessarily a sponsorship packet, but ways to get involved. I think one of the biggest things that we're trying to focus on is donations and volunteers.
12:38.
117. It's 2:14 p.m.
The website before was a little disorganized. Now everything's laid out in the open, straight to the point.
We talked with Mark about like what we're doing and what content we're putting on there. And I got really, really excited about like the stuff that we can actually like make for him and show him, and it's gonna look really cool when we're done. I think it'll really help him out a lot.
So we've got the About Us, the events, photos, vlog, and the donation. We really got a sense of what he does for the community, and it was nice to actually really represent that through the website.
Like when we got to actually show Mark, the owner, the website, seeing the reaction on his face, it was so genuine, so real. It was that moment of we put in so much time and effort into this project. This is what makes it all worth it.
by us coming in, I think that we really learned what it means to help others and to work as a team and to do things for the common.
So I think it all came down to learning what we're capable of in one day, and then taking that and seeing like we're capable of doing that, we're capable of doing so many other things out in the real world.
And I think that's what makes this street team so special, is that everyone is super passionate, super inspiring, and together we collaborate and create great work.
Here we go, thanks.
You're welcome.
Shelby, when's the last time you saw that video?
A couple months ago. Yeah.
Bringing back memories.
Take a few minutes and make some notes and see if you identify, think about what learning you see there, what reflections you have on that right now. Go ahead. Just we'll write quietly.
Is anybody remote?
No, but it's broadcasted live on YouTube, so someone could come across it. And once it finishes, it'll be YouTube.
Oh, that's good.
So might be looking at Bill's back on YouTube.
So, as you're fed up, we've learned sort of the hard way. One of the tricky parts about assessing a video like that is we don't necessarily know what was assigned, especially as educators and people who care about specific outcomes. We don't really know what was assigned, and so that's one of the major limitations that we're starting with, and with all due respect. But given that, we'll get to that. We'll find out what was assigned. But we'd like to organize and ask you to put your post-it notes up on our big board. This is it's like a whiteboard, right? That can be written on dry erase board. So then we're gonna self-organize. So we'll have a little bit of chaos while we organize. But feel free to move things around that look like something else you've seen, and we'll try to give this mess some shape. This mass of learning some shape. So go ahead and post your post-its. The magic of 3M comes to life.
Do you want these written out as like statements of what they learned?
Or it can just be thoughts or statements. Yeah, okay. Whatever works for you. Okay.
Do you want us to group them as we're putting them up?
Yeah, if you see common themes or common statements or notes, feel free to attach yours to somebody else's. There's no wrong answer here. There's also no right answers.
Hopefully there are some answers.
Yeah, there are answers.
Sorry, I saw a bullseye. Sorry.
you want to take some pens and start to put some words around some of these clusters? Carl, you're usually good at that. If you want to give it a shot.
No.
No? Give it to Stuart.
Stuart's good. He's great.
Shelby, you want to take a pen and see if you can, you can even add, right, the power of the pen, you can add them.
Okay.
Yeah. We're just trying to see what kind of clusters are coming up here. Yeah, are there topics that sort of cluster together there?
You want to slow it down?
Yes, I would like to.
I'm desperate to slow it down. It's a matter of just weeks now, isn't it? We're just barely over halfway. Sure, we're just barely over halfway. Whatever you say.
Just using teamwork, collaboration, teamwork. Our students are first ever.
So are you still working with the guy that you met at South by Southwest?
You know, I just got in touch with him recently, I don't know, years. And so that I was for my book, and so I was like, I want to call you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of cultural. So, 2 more than 1 week. So, one for another.
Is there an announcement?
Sure. Yeah. So they haven't updated the PhD still the organization called Computer Intelligence. So
First day of knowledge of course. No, dude, it's your policy.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a whole nother Washington. So, we have one meeting. Yeah, I think so.
No, cool. I can't wait to.
You know, yes, exactly. I'll get together with Julie. I'm going to Pennsylvania next week. Maybe
I don't have to be. I'll be on Thursday. Yeah, I still have to wait till.
As you find your coffee, I want you to, we can take a look at some of the categories that emerged. And I want you to put yourself in, we always are wearing multiple hats as educators and assessors, as students, learners and teachers at the same time. And so if you can think about what it would be like to be a student seeing this list after being a part of an experience, what it's like to be a learner and have a group of smart people say, wow, this is what I saw in your learning. This is what I saw demonstrated in just a short artifact, a short learning artifact.
Well, you can ask
Yeah.
Shelby.
Oh, yeah, Shelby, we have a first-hand account. But think about that for a second. Put yourself in that mindset. And for some of us, it might have been a while since we've been in a class or in a learning experience where we're the ones, on the expected end. Well, what might that be like to see this reflected back to you? Say, wow, this is what I think you learned. Yeah.
To some students, it could be intimidating, actually, because they're going to look at where their sticker is in the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
And I don't know, if they have a familiarity with what's going on and what these groups are, then it's fascinating to see. I would just worry one thing is that an undergrad might look at this and go, well, did I get it right?
Yeah, did I get it right?
Yeah, is my sticker under to these groups?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So,
Thanks.
and this, I'll direct this to Shelby too. So, this happened in one day, is this correct? And all of the interviews were shot on the same day, or
This
no?
was actually on a separate day.
Okay.
Stuff in the beginning that was like we are the same work study team. That
Yeah.
and our testimonials were all shot on the same day, about a week or two afterwards.
Uh-huh.
I want to say.
So the reflective time that happened in there was about a 2-week period for that.
Yes and no. We did a lot of reflecting, like because we had about an hour and a half drive home, and we also met the following 2 or 3 days later just to kind of debrief on everything that happened. So it was kind of circling around in our heads. But yeah, it was about 2 weeks.
So here's my real question. So the ideas that we have that we were able to see in the video that was compiled from those kinds of reflections, do they still represent the kinds of things, the kind of learning that you feel now much later in reflecting back on the experience?
I think like watching the video again, it kind of stirs up a lot of, for me, it fell a lot under reflective and the cognitive and emotional. I didn't things, but when I went to
Awesome.
In my
That's too rare. Yeah, I think it would be interesting to compare an experience like this with surveys or written reports to see what kind of outcomes you get. Yeah. Because intuitive kinds of pros, but I do think pros with the video would make it more even more dynamic. Yeah.
And I put that on the table as a genuine, I have no idea what I even think about that relationship. Seriously, I don't.
I think what really spoke to me is that with listening to this conversation is we do a survey and we do like the quantitative questions, and we follow with the qualitative questions. And what students say they learned quantitatively is so much different than when you go through what they write. And so now I'm thinking, well, what if we add to that then a different component to find out even more from these students? Because the difference between, and one of them is, critical thinking or communication skills, and all of the students, not all, but a large percentage of students are like, I didn't learn anything about communication skills in the quantitative part. And then when they're talking about it, what's the best thing I learned? Oh, it's great, I learned about my communication, and it's like, okay. So now, this is going to be a different level.
I think from just the science's point of view, a lot of times we think of summative assessment as being, it does not look like this, because there's really not a lot of feedback or reflection that occurs at the summative level. So in some ways, I think this is an interesting approach, because you don't normally get that kind of reflection time. And I don't know all the science classes what but it's an interesting question for me, at least the rest of it.
What does what mean?
The formative,
the reflective pieces.
Right, because I think most of our reflective pieces would occur earlier on in the semester, where you get feedback on performance, or and invariably our final projects don't have a lot of feedback, because it's really like, okay, we're going to evaluate you, and that's kind of the summative point. And I doubt many students actually read comments on there or thoughts about their summative science experience.
I kind of cheated because I was there when we watched the individual reflections of the students before they were compiled. Well, they were compiled in another version. But I think those individual reflections of the students sitting in a room by themselves afterwards really highlighted a lot of the application of their learning, how they didn't realize they had learned the skills that they had and able to apply those into the scenario that they were given. So in this version, we get a lot more of the cognitive, emotional, reflective. But I think in the individual spoken reflections, we saw a lot more of the application of learning and some of those harder skills that are in those rubrics at MSU and for learning rubrics and such. So I think that's interesting, whether it be written or verbal reflection, that individual piece tells something a little bit different than the compiled piece.
Yes. Talk to each other, please.
You're one group, right? You put that.
I didn't group all of them, but I helped.
Okay. So you experienced it.
Okay.
And if you're looking at those notes and coming up with these groups, did it reflect what you learned, or is it you're just
these groups?
Yeah. And did you learn anything from actually, being involved in the grouping of these? As the learner?
I think that all of these were skills that I don't think I really learned all of these, maybe. Like I said, I would be more like on the community field, cognitive, emotional, and reflective. But I think that this is a really good collection of all of the skills that were learned, or all of the things that we didn't even realize that we learned while we were there, that really came out in the videos.
One of the things that in looking at this too, I'm trying to follow everything that's going on. It sounds like there's part of us are speaking to the idea of video and the videoing of this, sort of capturing and creating an experience. But then there's also the experience that the students went through. And certainly the one thing that we haven't talked about at all yet is the experience of the people who were there. We had all these folks come in and show for a day. And I think that's a great place to start thinking about the experiential learning that's going on as well. But one of the things that I think that is interesting about this video here, as representative of some of the things that you were saying about assessment as well, is when you take interviews at the beginning and you document expectations, and then you go through an experience, and then my question earlier to Shelby was, where does the reflection happen? And if it can systematically happen at several different points, now you can start to track the learning of the individuals who are going through it, because they talk about expectations, and then what's happening, and then how they put that in relation to the expectations that they had earlier, etc. So that's a nice place to track actual learning, as opposed to simply documenting knowledge.
or documenting some ideas that may be potentially pre-formed. So I think that that's a good way to start thinking about how this medium is actually, and this kind of documentary technique can actually lead toward that kind of revelation.
I'm curious too, how did the story of this get put together? Like who edited this video? And I also have been contaminated by having seen some of the individual ones, and I've seen this actually a couple of times too. So, but I imagine that you could make several different videos about this experience, and that in itself might be also an interesting way to assess this. Like if you gave people the source material and said, okay, you were there,
tell your story.
Make your story out of this material, and even would include the partners, not just the MSU people. Right.
Well, I think we were fortunate enough to have two really talented videographers on the team who created the video. I think that you're right. If like a designer versus a PR social media person were to make it, would have been totally different. But yeah, and that's kind of a problem as well. Like not everyone's a videographer. Not everyone is a great storyteller, which I'm sure is kind of what we're here.
Yeah, that is why we're here. So these are really interesting points. I'm glad we're talking about this, and a lot of them we're working on these design elements, multiple reflections over the course of a instructional experience, a final story made by each individual, so we can actually see the kinds of learning and sense making that we're seeing collectively or somewhat collectively in this group, but see what they're doing as individuals, hopefully related to their disciplinary topic. So if it's writing or science, biology or whatever, hopefully they're bringing out those experiences from those courses or from service learning opportunities, things like that. That's the goal. We want to see that stuff, but for the individual in these kind of ways.
I'd like to, when you talk about multiple stories, I like that idea too, because I worry about stories being generic, and so the students may think, well, we have to talk about how we were over our head, what I learned, and my success.
Because that's
that's the way a story goes.
Exactly.
But what if you have to tell a success story and a failure story?
There you go. Oh, it's multiple from the same person.
Right. Tell two stories, and one has to be a comedy and one has to be a tragedy.
Yeah, that's an excellent.
Because to some extent, generic conventions will drive how you tell that story.
Particularly in this case, because what's become the cliche genre for the college admissions essay is, I went on a mission trip to try and change the life of those people, but really what happened was my life was changed. And every graduating high school student knows how to tell that story.
Yeah.
Well, one of the interesting things about this one was when we started, David Wheeler says, the first thing I said, oh, well, we should get you some. He goes, well, maybe we should just ask our students for reflections on what they just did. And great idea. How about if we get you some prompts? It's like, Carla, how about some prompts? And I think there's like 10 questions you could ask if you're doing a reflection. And David Wheeler was like, no, let's not do that. Let's keep it totally unstructured. Let's not prompt it at all. Let's not give it a goal that they have to tell a certain kind of story about a tragedy or anything. Let's just see what they share. And I can't remember, how did he word it to you guys, Shelby? It was, give me 2 minutes by yourself in a room, not influenced by any other of the students, and just tell. How did he say? Tell us what happened, or?
Yeah, he just said say whatever you want to say. It has to be just. We kind of wanted it to be very organic, nothing structured, because I think once it gets structured, we would have gotten the same answers from every single person.
It would be interesting though to see whether the same answers came out anyways. I haven't seen all what our 15 of them were. If everyone went in and told the same kind of story, then
they're all different.
Okay.
It's also interesting.
They're all different. 2-minute videos.
A different kind of environment. If I remember correctly, might have been in Tennessee. One of the situations, everything went wrong, and they were almost not able to do any of the things they came there to do, and everything was getting delayed.
Yeah, this was in the other South by Southwest.
So the story of that, compared to this, is really interesting to see like how the same people reacted to a whole different dynamic in terms of their relationship to the community partner.
And to each other.
Right.
So one of the things that struck us, Shelby, when we debriefed with everybody on the team, when we just shared our kind of reflections back, a lot of the students said, well, we didn't learn anything. but I realized, yada, yada, yada. Remember those conversations? Yeah. I realized that, I thought, but they didn't think of it, they didn't equate it with I learned X. I wasn't being graded, it wasn't an assignment, so it wasn't learning, but I experienced, yada, 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 and had an epiphany or whatever. And then it seemed like, and you can talk about this. So this was like a pilot trip for a series that you did on the way to South by Southwest. And did you guys continue the reflection piece, or how did this experience and this reflection thing impact what you did afterwards?
Yeah, actually, exactly what you were saying. Every night, they would debrief after every experience with the nonprofit. And so there were testimonials. Everyone would go either in the bathroom or somewhere else away from everyone and do this same style of very organic, non-structured testimonial video after every experience with the nonprofit to kind of see what we've learned.
So did your way of responding change the more you did it?
I actually wasn't on the trip down to South by Southwest, but I think there were, you saw the video, yeah. There were a few very emotional responses. Like at one point, there's like a breakdown from one of the girls who's like, I don't know why I'm here. I'm playing no role. I think a lot of it was exhausting, the whole experience, and you see that change throughout the trip.
So Mark, I want to go back to something you said earlier about sort of like the difference between video and text. And, and because some of this stuff makes good movie. The emotional stuff makes itself available to making good movie. But that doesn't mean that in these testimonials, and something that Chris just said too, is folks don't necessarily think of things that they're saying as learning. And yet at the same time, through the transcript or through the communication in a variety of forms, you can start to go back, and if you can track this, you can go back and go, well, here it is how you were talking about such and such. And then let's see how it reveals, because you talk about that again and again and again. What does that reveal about learning? And that's a diagnostic tool for educators and for individuals as well, if it can be made available as a diagnostic tool. And so that's why I think having sort of multiple mediations of this, having it available in lots of different kinds of ways, to be processed in many different kinds of ways, makes it a really powerful educational tool as well.
I was wondering about this assessment. So we're talking about assessment of student learning. And in some ways, you can assess student learning about their experience. But if you're actually talking about the application of what they learned, so these websites, do we have any idea if these websites are actually good, or do they, how does that pair with the narratives, the storytelling? Because otherwise what we're doing is we're assessing students' feelings about their learning.
And for me, in terms of doing community-based work in this domain, which I've been facilitating for 15 years, that it's more important that they be sustainable. Right? So this goes back to Bump's missing component, which is the community component, and the danger of these one-day trips, right? So for us, we knew we could make a good website for a community-based organization, but it was an entirely different problem for them to be able to redo it and update it and change it and live with it. That is the more important. That's the more important good measure for me than whether the object they made on that day is good. Another component is it sustainable by that organization over time? So that's doing good.
And I think this brings up a really important parallel set of assessment that needs to happen. So this video exposition becomes an artifact of some kinds of learning, but not necessarily a direct assessment of the product itself, or the sort of summative kind of assessment that we do at the end of terms or at the end of a major or something like that. So we want to see competence. And Shelby died, she said it could. Just so but in some of the reflections, the discussions were about creating sustainable websites where people could self-update, where the organizations could do it themselves, because that was one of the challenges early identified in what's the problem? Well, we don't have media people or money for that.
that was actually one of Mark's problems that he talked to us about. Was he had someone previously go in and like do this whole website for him, but he had no idea how to go in himself.
That's not a technical issue, that's a human issue.
Yeah. So let me draw a picture. So one of our assumptions for assessment, this is just one example. So we sort of have this model in our head that may prove out to be not true at all. But one assumption is that when there's an experience, whatever the flavor is, a project like this, a project like you guys are doing, your study abroad that you just did, there are, what's the word we use here for the planned outcomes?
Intended, yeah.
Okay, so there are, the teacher's intended outcomes, which might be sustainable projects and quality of craftsmanship and things like that. And then over here are what we call the invisible or the embedded outcomes. We know they're there, they come out anecdotally. We might not be doing any specific activities to make them visible or to formally assess them, but we know they're there, that's why we do this stuff. So we call them embedded, because they're embedded in the experience. And what this experiment was about could we make this part visible in a way that could actually be assessed. That was our problem statement. Could we make the embedded part of the experience, this is the whole thing, the whole experience, could we make the embedded part less invisible? Could we bring it to the surface in a way where you could tag it to outcomes in a way that's accessible by educators? So that's kind of our problem. This was our first experiment.
And one of the early, right away we saw in these videos, and with all due respect to the work and the energy that went into them, what we see here are pretty cursory or maybe even surface level kinds of learning, right? These aren't, we wouldn't say this person really has a mastery of teamwork from what we just saw. There's no way for us to assess that as educators. So we know we're dealing with right now evidence of a breadth of possible kinds of outcomes, but we don't know much about the depth, and nor are we saying we can know from this kind of artifact. But that's why it needs to parallel what the intended outcomes are. So one of the frameworks we're playing with, you can take with it, is this T-shaped professional. It's not the best framework, so there's a handout for everybody. But it's a way to start thinking about.
Yeah, Phil Gardner calls this a metaphor. Right? He's been writing about this for over a decade, and it's a metaphor for thinking about student outcomes. The horizontal part of the T and the vertical part. And there's, people, well, they're more like M-shaped people. There's multiple verticals. Right. But we thought these sorts of things tend to, these embedded outcomes that we're trying to pull out, show up there in the me part, and some of the horizontal aspects.
Speak across disciplines, to speak across content areas.
I think go back and speak back to what you were saying too about assessing the product and assessing the people. And I think those are two different things. Potentially you go about those in very different ways. Assessing products is really pretty easy. You can look at effectiveness. There's lots of metrics to be able to do that. It's really hard to assess what kind of a learning trajectory that people take along, especially in any kind of creative work. What are the decisions that people make? Where do they start to track changing those decisions? And how do they start to assess the kinds of situations they're going into? So when we're training people to go out into the world, we're not training them to make a video for that group. We're training them to be people who make videos or who go and do the kinds of works that they do. And I think that that's a nature of assessment that we haven't really been paying an awful lot of attention to, and that's tracking these individual kind of affective responses, where I think it's more than simply looking at how people express their feelings about things, especially if it can be a systematic kind of approach to it. You can get folks talking about, I've just been doing this for a while with lots of kind of interview-based work, that people will talk about an awful lot of similar things that will help you track how they think across things that they find important in their lives, if you listen long enough and you listen deliberately enough and persistently enough, and become the kind of person and provide the kind of environment where people actually want to tell those kinds of stories. So that's the other part of the storytelling thing. There's the quality of storytelling, but there's also why on earth do people want to tell stories? What are the kinds of stories that could turn into these kinds of productive things as well?
I think that what's interesting. what's interesting about what you just said to me is that the assessment then is actually not about reflecting back to students what their learning is. That's actually another process, but this is about informing your explicit goals.
There's actually a reciprocal character to the assessment. Because we're educators connected to a university, we focus on student learning. We could also use this assessment as an index of community impact. And that actually goes together with the sustainable part. I mean, all the people who you made this website for probably learned things from interacting with you. And there are traces of that in this video that could be teased out. There could be another story, which is what did these students impart to these people they interacted with, which is potentially just as important as what the students got out, especially if you're looking at it over a sustained period of time. So beyond being able to keep their website going, what did they learn about interacting with these kids who were surprised at the environment? And in some of the other environments that comes out. So the differences between their social background, their class awareness, and all these other kinds of things in their interaction is also part of the learning. And this is a way of assessing that too.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because for an experiential learning project, it's the students, but you have to also look at the community that they're helping.
Right.
And that helps you tailor your program better, and how you want to deliver services to a nonprofit or whatever the subject of the experiential learning is. So from the people who set these up, knowing how some things work and how some things didn't is valuable to create a better experience for the student.
Yeah. One of the big challenges with experiential learning is that's a big umbrella term for a lot of different kinds of things depending on how the learning is facilitated. So I mean, study abroad can be experiential learning. You know, there's adventure-based programming, there's service learning, there's mentoring,
student experience of a student engagement,
lab
support.
undergraduate research is often a version.
But that's where the story also is, in a sense, a story for a specific group of people.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
that's when it stops being generic and going back to the video rich media thing. Sometimes video can be an obstacle. It's not superior to prose. I mean, prose has the ability to get you to focus on things because you have to imagine them and they're not just presented to you visually.
Oh, he's redeemed himself.
No, my question was genuine. I was just yanking on this chain.
I think it's true. I mean, you have to. There's an assumption that video is superior because you see things, but that isn't really true. I mean, reading things can get you to focus in ways that's very difficult to do visually. The other way around, like I'm not really interested in making a good movie that falsifies the reality of the community. So I think the balance between video technique and descriptive prose and so forth is really important. But I do think at some point it has to become specific and distinctive to whoever's involved in the interaction.
Well, I also think too, I think students think, you mentioned students think of learning, no, I didn't learn anything, but then this, and this. I think that's a general issue, is that students have this very narrow sense of what learning is and don't themselves realize, wow, look at what I've gained. Nope, I learned this, I got an A and a B, whatever. And one of the goals of experiential learning, I think, would be to try to deprogram them on that a little bit. So maybe they think of learning more broadly.
Not only that, but I think there's a corresponding part of that which has to do with what they have to offer. So if you ask them, did you teach anybody anything, they probably say, no, what are you talking about? But it could be that people learned all kinds of things from them that they didn't necessarily think were important or worth mentioning.
Can I ask a question that I think picks up on Stephen's line of thinking? So as you guys are thinking about assessment, are you thinking about this in terms of formative assessment or summative assessment, or probably both? And in that regard, how are you thinking about the issue of time?
Whose time?
Well, so there's at least two senses of time. One is, if it's formative assessment is timely.
Right.
If it's not timely, it's not formative. It's just sort of really badly timed summative.
Yeah.
And the other issue is the time frames, and so this scales to whether or not, how this scales to course experiences, project experiences. semester experiences and 4-year experiences.
Absolutely.
And that's the other sense of time we
So
were
great.
thinking about when these things happen and how long we pay attention to particular kinds of students.
Or if it's for the student or for the program.
Yeah.
Right, right. Because I mean, since a lot of it's about, well, we can show that this is a worthwhile program, not that this student has progressed to a certain point.
That's one of
Depends on your goals. You want to share the kinds of things we're doing with this?
yeah. So yeah, these are these are things we're considering. So time, grain, and what I call grain size, or the grain size of the experience we're dealing with. So are we, one day at a project site, or are we semester long, or 2-week study abroad? What's our grain size of experience is an important question that relates to time. And then, so we're thinking about a series of, open-ended, unstructured reflections in a semester course, embedded in a semester course, assigned as part of the work, but designed to be formative. A series of 3 or 4, probably 3 reflective videos where the student provides, their reflection on what is going on in their life, in the course, in the context of mattering. And again, we're trying not to structure too much, so it's hard to balance that. And then at some point along the way, between maybe the second and the third, there's some sort of feedback given to the student, like a coaching session, perhaps. Actually, we're thinking about that with the neighborhoods, where there's a coach, there's somebody designated to look at the video with the student and say, hey, this is where I think your trajectory is. So timely formative, right? That's sort of one of the key tenets. And then the final story, the sense-making piece, is where the student does something final, does some summative work to demonstrate their sense-making. Not necessarily their mastery of the content, but their sense-making of it underlying their experience in the context, about the content, but not, hey, this is my demonstration of website design, or this is my demonstration of biology 100 content, or this is my demonstration of professional writing. Not that. That's still the instructor's issue and expertise, right? So what we're trying to do is get at some of the stuff that isn't intended but is present through these powerful learning experiences, because we believe they're powerful. We believe there's more going on. Like you said, when you ask a quantitative question, you get one answer. When you ask a qualitative question, you get a different one. And that's what we're trying to tap into. So then to get to your question about who uses it, that depends on the waiver you use, right? So our research intends to give, to have students get a report, a summative report after the fact of something like this. Like, here's the list of things that an outside assessment team thinks you learned. And maybe that's used in an advising meeting with a faculty member, or a coaching meeting with a mentor, or something like that, to continue to form the path to success. It also can be used for programming. Our colleagues in engineering are really interested in this because they have a strong accreditation environment. And some of these things speak to one of their accreditation standards that isn't easy to quantify. And so they're ready. They're like, great, let's go after this, because if we can see this, we'll pay for it. And then we don't have to teach it. So they're ready from a very discrete program level to say something. And then, what's that?
Sorry, that was my inside voice.
Oh, okay. And then the institution is also interested. So yet another rubric for you to pass around. This is MSU. This is one of MSU's undergraduate learning goals rubrics for integrated learning. And this is one of 5 undergraduate learning goals. So these are things we expect all undergraduates to get. And this is just one of the 5, but integrated learning sort of starts to. Right now, it's pretty vague.
Oh, did we cheat or what? Talk about compound competencies.
Telling you, right?
What a cheat.
So so the institution, right? So we're dealing with the student level, the course or program level. There's definitely instructor feedback that can be used to integrate these outcomes into regular practice. We think, there's a possibility. So if you know that 10% more outcomes are occurring on a regular basis from your course, can we offer more credit for that? I think that's a legitimate question. Right? If you know that these things after over 2 years or 2 cycles or whatever, or 10 cycles, or however many it takes to validate it, I think it's a fair question to ask how you can recognize that. So we're working at a number of different levels to get to your questions. All right, does that help? I don't know how it's going to play out, because we're trying to do this at scale. Is our next big project with the neighborhoods. I pointed to Tom because he's in the neighborhoods. with the neighborhood coaching program for first-year students, where their intended outcomes are around student success skills, and we're going to look for what the unintended, or sort of the embedded outcomes of that program are.
From two sides, too.
Yeah.
So participants and coaches.
Yeah,
so
right.
Trying to use this method to, not only are we going to, not only are we going to look at the students that are being coached, but the students that are coaches. So are they getting a different set of outcomes and learning kind of more of those embedded outcomes than we would expect?
So that's our next big step forward on this big idea. There's a lot of ideas in here.
I mean, there's lots of different ways. We have so many questions. So if you assume there are embedded outcomes, and then you make them more visible through various ways of telling more stories, students telling the stories, or communities, blah, 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 blah. So you make it more visible, and then in what ways does that feed? Now they're visible. They're not. They can become intended, all right? And then can you deepen them? You know, like what happens there? Do you kill it, or can you strengthen it? You know? So what are the methods? We have a lot of questions about, like a lot of the things that came up today.
How do we get
How
this
do
to
you
the
do
student?
it?
Yeah.
How often do you do it? And there's probably no one way at all, right? There's probably a bunch of different ways. What I'm kind of starting to think about is, it comes back to, I think Bumpy said this, and it's about kind of listening. It's listening more deliberately, and it's creating an environment where this listening really impacts the students' self-knowledge and their learning, because that's really what we're all trying to accomplish anyway. Yeah, we need evidence for our courses and our programs, but really it's about creating this. So lots of times assessment isn't really listening, right? But I think one part of this experiment that we didn't share was, in addition to having the students do 2-minute reflections of this just one thing, like Shelby did, and then we did a debriefing sort of like this with the students saying, hey, look at all the stuff we think you learned, you know? Yeah. And then there was another round, I can't remember what it was. Carla, you were part of this too. But anyway, we took all the artifacts of our conversations as a group, the debriefing, the original reflections, the compiled story that the videographers made, which is what you guys saw. And we gave it to experts at Empire State College that are experts in prior learning assessment. These are people whose job is looking at student portfolios and equating it to academic credit. You're like, oh yeah, that's the equivalent of 3 credits and blah, blah, blah disciplines. They saw all these materials, and they gave us a ton of feedback back. It was very kind of just exploratory. And they said, wow, these are powerful. A lot of information that you can get in a short period of time. That's the nature of video. They, confirmed all these things. We talked about these rubrics. They suggested other rubrics that they're familiar with, because they have their own lenses that they look at things with. There's a new rubric that they're working on for what they call global integrated learning or something, that they thought a lot of the things that they observed matched up to that rubric. So as the listening lenses get more refined, you don't end up with these who can assess to these big things? So they're very discrete sentences of skills, knowledge, and behavior, from mastery to novice, that scale. And more and more people are developing those sorts of lenses. And I think the lenses are important because they enable us to check things off. We can show the breadth, we can show the depth. I got the nice numbers for creditors and so on. But I think it's this active listening that we're really after. It's the listening in the environment. Yeah, the data helps. We need the data because maybe we could accelerate people's progress or realize there's variables for improved completion or more alignment with job outcomes, etc. So we're looking at this and data. We're looking at in what ways can this whole thing be worth more in some way to students, more in better jobs, more in better credit, with faster acceleration through their program. Who knows what will come out of it. But I think we don't want to lose sight of that. We don't want to mechanize listening to embedded in things in an experience that just kill it. It becomes a survey. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. Is unintended outcomes part of that box first?
Yeah,
So we moved away from unintended to embedded.
I think they're different.
They are different. The feedback we got on unintended was that it carries a bit of a negative connotation. So we might want to think about.
You have intended, so.
Right.
We've used invisible, we've used unintended. I think it depends on your context.
The reason it's important, embedded may be things that you simply didn't pay attention to or become formally aware of, but unintended could be you weren't planning them, that you got them, and once you got them, serendipity is desirable or undesirable. Second question, and I know this is going to sound really weird coming from a musician, but what do you mean by listening?
Tell me what you think that I mean by listening.
I can't tell you what I think you mean.
I mean listening in the way that Julie and Bump exemplify in their, what do you call it?
Literacy core.
Yeah, literacy core. How do you describe that sort of listening?
Now that we've described it as a sort
Just
of
describe what you do, and then that'll answer Mark's question.
Well, geez, there's all kinds of ways to think about listening. I think Mark is a really great question. One of the things that we think about listening is in a very scenic kind of way, and that sort of the baseline philosophy for this is that the scene is the container for the act, so people will fit acts to certain kinds of scenes. And so certain kinds of listening environments will produce certain kinds of speaking. But trying to vary the scene in ways to be able to listen in a variety of ways in order to elicit different types of ways of telling stories. And one's own story is a really important thing as part of the structural design. And I could say more about that, but I also wanted to say something a little bit more about something Chris just said here, and that is not trying to structure this too much. But at the same time, I always think of this kind of stuff as an obstacle course. That every person is going to go through the obstacle course in their own way. But you have to design an obstacle course in a way that you want folks to be able to meet certain kinds of challenges and be able to track how well they meet those challenges, so that you're able to address when obstacles become impasses, when somebody gets stuck at a certain kind of place, and you can help them over it. And so one of the feedback loop of here from the outcomes, or where the learning starts to happen and how it circles back into the intended, that can happen through, we talked about sort of laying out projections and then reflections at the end, but these individual reflections along the way, these progress reports, if you will help be able to say, now here's my revised, or to use Jeff's Eli system, here's my revision plan for how I'm going to go about this now. Here's how I'm going to continue on my path. These can be, but this is a structural way that can create an obstacle for them to be able to use. These kinds of reports, this kind of listening, doesn't get at the final story, but create opportunities to document things that people will use again later. So the part of the vision of this and the strategic alignment of all of this is imagining getting people to do things and say things that they'll be able to use later as a resource, and not as, that's the assignment that I did and that's done, and now I go and do the next assignment, but rather, look what you said here, here, and here. Look at those things that you reflected on over time. Now what can we make out of that? And I think that that's an important way to start thinking about building these kinds of obstacle courses, is where is it that you're able to start to create artifacts of how they've gone through the experience. And I think that works with any kind of creative act. And that's a special kind of listening, because it listens for a different kind of story than maybe is the story that is revealed through a video, or it's, through. I hear an awful lot in writing studies about people about being really, really upset with the quality of the reflective essays that come at the end, that are more like freeform jazz odyssey, or performances of the good student kind of narrative. And I think that this kind of strategic approach to this can potentially start to unpack some of that by creating different kinds of data that different kinds of stories. Sorry.
So,
did you get all on video?
So part of the reason for asking about listening had to do with the way it's sometimes used as I think we're talking about metaphorical listening, not necessarily literally. Even the listening that's selective attentiveness to what you hear, but a more broader concept of listening that usually is juxtaposed with speaking. So there's this condescending, patronizing gesture where one can decide that you're just going to listen. And that kind of listening usually is put up as a kind of deliberate pacification of your speaking intent to allow somebody the space to speak or whatever. And I think in contradistinction to that, there's another kind of listening where you actually only demonstrate listening when you speak, and somebody else notices that what you're saying reflects something you heard of what they said. And that's a particular kind of listening that, and again...
What do you call that? Does it have its own word?
Good coaching is what I call it.
Well,
I mean, that's one of the labels.
I mean, I don't have a name for it. I'd be glad to go.
We call that classic, that's what I was trained as classic active listening.
But that also includes, I mean, listening encompasses hearing what's not said.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And the choices from which what's said, you can infer choices that were not taken. And all that kind of listening, whatever you want to call it, I think is categorically different from the sort of passive, well, I'll let you talk now.
Yeah, I don't mean that. I'll let you talk now, Dan.
No, I don't.
Is it beautiful?
I don't think we're trying to go to that with this method.
Assume that, but it's worth making explicit, I think.
I think we need to start to wrap up. So we want to get your ideas
Where would
that
you-
emerged to take your
What
takeaways.
piece of this makes sense? What piece do you think you could integrate into something you're doing now? What piece would you like to develop more understanding? I mean, a lot of people from different kinds of work, so it makes sense that we would have varying ideas about it.
Stuart, any ideas for what you're thinking about doing? I mean, you came and shared your particular technique that you use when you're asking students and trying to understand how their decision making is changing over time.
Well, the thing is, I used to, when I ran the internship program in our department, I asked students to make reflective videos, about 6 of them over a semester, but they were all ended up being stories. I like the idea of these sort of 2-minute freeform things that get turned into stories later, because I'm still, if you could collect a number of reflections as you go along, and maybe even have interaction with the teacher, but I'm still, that becomes then, just like this group did, they had a bunch of interviews, it sounds like, right? And then they turn that into a story, so they're the 2-minute pieces. And then there's what we create.
Yeah.
And at least for me, to allow students to make more of those little pieces first, and then think about creating a couple types of stories later, rather than tell me a story every week. I guess some parts I would not call a story, right? I would just say, let's talk for a while, I want a narrative. So we'll make a narrative later. Yeah.
So is this something you might put in your fall or spring course?
Well, I'm not teaching the internship this fall. So
Okay.
that, I don't know that I could do that in that course. It'd be interesting though, because I'm teaching a first-year writing course to try it with them.
It'd be interesting to kind of, for those of you who might be wanting to actually try something in the fall semester, we could regroup sometime in the middle of fall or at the end or something. It'd be interesting to hear what people learn. Yeah.
Listen to what happens.
Yeah. Angie.
Actually, I was thinking about video versus prose versus videos. There's also a student comfort level. So it might be interesting. The first reflection can be how they choose to do it. Either they can do a video or they can write something. They can do an art project. Something that they're comfortable in, medium they're comfortable in doing. And then maybe introducing a video, more writing prose. Because I'm not sure people, it's like learning how they also define reflection. I'm talking about undergraduates. So they're coming out of high school. I'm not sure anybody's ever asked them to reflect on something. Or even if they know how to do it. But giving them an experience where they choose how to express what they're thinking.
Thanks.
I think teaching them, like you were saying, is really important to teaching students how to reflect in a good way. Because I know, thinking back to my freshman year, I would have been like, oh, well, I'll just write things easier, Whereas I didn't really know how to use a video. I didn't know how I could express myself artistically in that way.
teaching them those ways or giving them the tools to do that.
Absolutely. That's part of that structure, I think, is you create tools for them to be able to reflect easily and, learnedly at the end, rather than just expect the reflection to just happen. It's really important. It's really important for structure.
Tom, go ahead, Mike.
One thing that this has triggered for me, beyond the interest in just the capturing and seeing what comes out of that, hearing about this coaching makes me curious whether this could become part of a composing process. So that I'm curious if there's a developmental dynamic, if they could learn to discern that the framework they bring to coaching has an impact on what comes out in the assessment. And whether they could take, say, 2 or 3 different points of view as coaches and see the impact of taking those points of views of coaching on the kinds of things that come out in an assessment.
Are you going to take that on? Like, do something?
Probably.
That would be cool. Yeah. Tom, what are you thinking?
I think that it's important to, so I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around the idea of like the intended and the embedded outcomes piece, because I think that it's really easy for us to want to try to say, well, let's figure out every single possible thing that can fit inside of this box, and that's all our intended outcomes, and then we'll assess based off of that. But I think there's inherent value in these kind of embedded or explicit, the unintended out. I know that's not the terminology, but I think there's inherent value of that because it allows the lens of the learner to be brought into the factor, to be brought into the equation of, is if 10 students are, given the same experience in coaching, and each one of them is bringing kind of a different background, and each one of them gets kind of a different embedded outcome from that. And I think that's okay. But it's a matter of getting them to be able to articulate that, and this kind of the video reflection being the first step along that process of, I can articulate what this happened, or what happened to me. I will say that I think it's also going to move us in the direction of getting away from using outcomes as our assessment. So it's very easy for me to say, coaching to work if we have nobody on academic probation after the first semester. But that's not what they've learned. That's not saying, what did they actually learn in this? What did they learn so they're not on academic probation? Bill and I were having this conversation yesterday. This is just kind of helping to think about that even more.
An interesting statement. Getting out of using outcomes as an assessment.
Well, as I guess, yeah.
Blasphemy.
I didn't articulate
Blasphemy, Tom.
Right. But no, I mean thinking of getting more into the learning. So what are they actually, what skills, abilities, or competencies do they need to know for them to not end up on academic probation, as opposed to, we focus on retention, persistence, and academic success. Well, what does that mean? What do they need to know to how to be able to do in order to end up successful?
I think that's important to try and disentangle for as long as possible the difference between performance and learning.
Yeah.
Because performances are chock full of indicators of learning. Yeah. But sometimes you get remarkable learning gains and shitty performances, and those two things travel hand in hand. Sometimes it's necessary for that to happen.
And the inverse is true too. I mean, sometimes you can have some really shitty performances and some great learning.
Mm-hmm. So that shift would also allow you to tend to process and not just final product.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Stephen, what do you think?
I just want to point out, I really liked Tom's statement about maybe leaving some embedded outcomes as unstated, because if you state them, then by nature you're framing them in a certain way that they may not come true.
Right.
And so that's so we don't. I'm thinking about this mostly with regards to an ecology course, which is doesn't have a service learning component, but we have a component where they go out in nature to a site that they're interested in, and they apply the theories that we talk about to that site, and they document it with pictures and other types of artifacts. interesting to work with that. There's lots of ways through it.
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think right now I leverage it mostly with regards to like certain cognitive goals. And so rethinking like, what does that mean? It's that's kind of what's on my agenda for how to think about this.
Is that a fall semester class or a spring?
Summer.
Summer? Christy, you want to share your thinking?
Sure. Well, I think because our center provides resources, our goal is to provide resources to faculty, I think one of the things that we can do is develop something with multiple ways that reflection can happen. I mean, I've done things with Play-Doh before, so, you know, I think sometimes it's just a matter of generating some ideas, so I think it would be helpful for us to create something like that with.
Is there Play-Doh? Yeah, I was just gonna say, is that?
Sorry, that was
Play-Doh.
Probably Play-Doh too, but I haven't done that one yet.
And Nicole, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking along the lines of Christy. I also am in charge of our assessment, so I'm thinking about any way to do this from the center side in a slightly larger scale. But I don't know. So there's some thinking to do. But it'd be great to, in addition to surveys and whatever, have a focus group that also took part in like a pilot video.
You might want to think about seeing how we could, what we're thinking about doing with the neighborhood,
Yeah.
what we could do with the pilot group and whatnot to the thing. Okay, that'd be
Now
awesome.
let's have a conversation.
I think part of who knows? There's all different ways to make this, the unintended or the embedded outcomes more visible. So that I would love to explore more there. And then also thinking about scalability. No faculty member has the time. They're busy enough doing this, right? That's hard enough. They don't have time to do this. So, and how do you make it so that?
So why do you say that? Isn't it? I don't agree with that.
Oh, good. Disagree.
I think. So it depends on the issue of time, right? So I think a faculty member has to have her eye on two balls at the same time. One is what she's trying to accomplish in a course. But if she's invested in a curriculum and in a student's experience in a campus, then she has to be interested in what I think we have in the embedded side, which equate to changes in identity. And this is what universities have always done very well. And
without saying so.
Right. And those, if I don't want faculty in my department who don't have time for those things.
Well, that's
bad. I guess my question is, what can you use different types of experiential learning? If you're talking about a one-on-one undergraduate research project versus going out to a community in a service learning aspect, those are different fundamentally. Looking at them through this method may be very different and may not actually be possible for a one-on-one research project.
Yeah, we haven't tried it. I think one of the things we learned in just doing this little pilot, and just doing one isn't enough data to tell you anything really. It's just indicators. What we found out was that the people who are trained to look at student portfolios, artifacts of learning in multiple forms, number one, aren't used to seeing a lot of video. They're not seeing the emotional content. They're not being given evidence of changes in identity as clearly as they saw in this thing. So they were very intrigued. These are just two people, right? They were very intrigued with the possibilities here. They looked at not a whole lot of video, but the longer it is, the longer it's going to take to assess it, right? So you can't have a committee like that's a master's thesis, or a doctoral dissertation. No one can spend that much time. Or maybe they could if you restructured it so that people could spend their allotted time, focusing there. But I'm very mindful of what is scalable about these different methods. How could you actually get it implemented at scale for thousands of students, not just 20 or not just 10, not just a single course? So I'm also interested in learning what are scalability, what are the variables to play with, right? And what are the issues? Yeah. And I do think part of the solution, not the only solution by any stretch of the means, but I think there's something about expertise in prior learning assessment and people whose job in other schools and competency-based education, they separate the teaching. I know that this is a great way to do it, but one way to do it is separate the teaching from the assessment. So there's people who just do assessment of complicated things, not just reading and math and stuff. So no, there's something there. So that's part of what we're going to experiment with the neighborhoods is can we use prior learning assessment services to help us scale, and maybe we create our own sometime, if there seems to be a need for it. So we're just experimenting, but
so it could be interesting to use it at the other end. We had a discussion in the entrepreneurship roundup, and what if you use this in conjunction with things like admission tests? So Robert Sternberg is a psychologist who wrote about various kinds of creativity and developed two alternative measures of intelligence. One he calls creative intelligence, and the other is practical intelligence. And they used those for 5 years at Tufts in their admissions. And they found lots of really interesting things just from using those alternative forms. One of the parts of the creative intelligence was to give out a story with balloons with nothing in it. Students had to write the language content of the balloons. Another one that he mentioned was they had to write an essay describing what the world would be like if the Nazis had won World War II. And a third one had to do, you arrive at school, you got a mattress in the truck, go to bring it in the door, it won't fit through the door. How do you get it to the 4th floor? And to me, one of the most interesting things that came out of these was they found out over 3 years when they looked at the results of all 3 tests and correlated them, high performance evened out over racial and class lines. And so having those 3 kinds of measures seemed to make an enormous difference in admissions, and I don't see why experience recording. What if instead of the kind of essay that Jeff alluded to, that everybody already knows how to write, what if somebody could submit a video with their application? Experience reporting video that they put together, or a portfolio.
you can do that for programs. You can do that for your writing program. That's cool. I love all these ideas that came up. Carla, did you want to share something?
I just think it would be fascinating to do the same activity from the students. And I know there's some things that would happen there with peer-to-peer and how they would respond knowing if their peers are going to be viewing these videos, but I wonder how different these categories would be if students went through this process.
Categorizing.
Of categorizing exactly what we did, watching the video or watching the reflections and then
You
going
should
through about what they
organize
learned.
that.
Just to see if there would be any overlap or what.
Well, you know what? You can do that with your first swab group, Friends Without Borders. You've got videos, you've got the Sandbox students working on that. We could actually do that. That would be kind of interesting to do before. We could put all the teachers in this room over here. I could put all the students over here, and we can switch rooms and see what they came up with. Anybody else want to share, Jeff or Bump, any takeaways?
I mean, something I said earlier, the most powerful indicator of learning for me is our changes in identity. And we saw them in just this one-day experience, which is remarkable, actually. It's not, that's not a given. And so anytime we can, and by that I mean identification with and identification as. So to me, that's the vein of gold, and if we can achieve those things, then we're doing our job. So I'm interested in how those things are visible and not visible and how they play out.
Wow. This was really good. Yep. This was so good. I wanted to thank you for filling these out for us, and I wanted to bring your attention to a couple of things that are coming up. Rashad is teaching a MOOClet, we're calling it. It's an online experience that could also be delivered face-to-face or in different formats. In our first iteration of what we hope to be a collaborative platform of open content, competencies, and assessments around these storytelling abilities. And we talk about Angie, I think it was you, right? We should be teaching students how to reflect, or what are tools they can use for their own reflections. That's not like a topic in this MOOClet yet, but it certainly could be.
Sure.
Yeah, so this is, August 27th, it'll go live, they'll get email about it and stuff, but it'd be great if you want to participate in that and have some students experience it, give us some feedback on what would be useful. You can use it as a resource for your own, teaching your own students. It's meant to be more like a toolkit than a class, okay? So that's kind of, there is an experiential learning assessment toolkit. We're working on a grant that's going to be done on Friday that Jeff is part of, and Lori Thorpe is part of, and the first year engineering faculty are part of, to sort of take this method, not this year, but next year, and refine it, but mostly focusing on the video reflection and the video stories on it. And then we have Igniting Innovation on October 2nd. That's our annual morning event over in the Kellogg Center, and it'll feature some of this work. So we hope you'll come, and we might have a dialogue just about this. It sounds like many of you will be toying with some of these ideas. Keep us in, keep in touch with us so that we can collaborate and work together and keep moving this forward. Because we'd like to be able to, not have people work in isolation and reinventing the wheel, but if we can kind of get a group of people that are sharing what's working for them in their context, maybe we can, find some common threads, go after some money to really substantiate and publish what's going on here. Because I think this is, to me, this is some of the most powerful work that faculty can be doing in higher education right now. Because the emphasis on outcomes and rubrics and rationalizing everything and providing data for everything is necessary, but it's just the baseline, right? And it's these sorts of experiences and what you guys have talked about in your own experiences with students that are the meat of what we're actually doing. It's important to provide evidence and to understand it, but more important is to strengthen those experiences and not to keep them invisible and embedded or unintended all the time, but to really make that part of our value statement explicitly. Like I said, but maintaining all the good stuff about it. But it's so important to counter this efficiency trend that's going on in higher education across the country and internationally. There are more and more schools, efficiency, low cost, classroom competency based. I support that, though. It's important that we do that. But I think we need more emphasis at the same time on these things. This is our value, and this is what will maintain our value and our premium pricing, in my opinion. So it's really important work.
Also, preview of coming attractions in the fall. Some things that fit in with this in September and moving into October. We'll have some events featuring some work by Estrella Torres from residential college. She created a book with some children at Cristo Rey and other places called Nuestra Cuentos, which is our stories. So there's going to be a number of things that have to do with how she went about working with these kids to get their stories and to help them tell their stories and to get it out into the community in ways that allow it to have an impact. And then in November, there'll be a series of programs around the work of Kurt Stepnitz. Some of you may know him. He's the university photographer. He's also worked with MSU on producing their Global Stories series. And he's going to be talking about both working as an artist and working as an employee of MSU and how that works out in terms of its creativity, but more importantly, how he goes about trying to formulate stories that connect global developments to what's happening here locally at MSU. And he'll also have an exhibition of his photographs. And Australia will have exhibits related to the pictures.
And we'll have the Talk in Rock here, too.
That's right.
Right.
Can't wait.
The Project 6050, that was called, that project. This is what you're seeing here is a remix from the Cyrano de Bergerac play. You see the art and the photographs of Ana Luisa Cardona, but the things that, like the door and the bricks and stuff, are from the Cyrano de Bergerac play that a graduate student remixed pieces that set in here. And it worked out so well. We're going to keep some of it up as like permanent parts of our walls. And then they're going to take part of their 6050 show in September. And part of that is the rock, like a replica of a rock that I guess opens up and talks or something, or has a video display or something. I don't quite understand. It's not a puppet show, I know that. But that'll be on this fall in October. So thank you for coming today. And we'll collect your half sheets here. Thank you.
So I take it our 2 o'clock meeting here Tuesday. Tuesday for you gotta look for it. And then the other way of the other series.
What you listening to these days?